Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is Gabriel Silva. I'm a partner in the New York office of Winston& Elkins. Today, we're hosting our friends at Machado Meyer, one of the largest Brazilian law firms, and with whom we've had the pleasure of working very closely with over the past several years to discuss developments in the Brazilian energy market. As you may all know, there's been a change in the federal administration in Brazil very recently, and Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva was re-elected president once again and took office effective January 1st. The current administration has a very different mindset and ideology than the previous administration of President Bolsonaro, and we expect that will reflect on the policy and priorities for the energy sector in Brazil for the next 4 years. With just a bit over 100 days into this new cycle, a lot has been discussed in terms of policy for the energy sector, and we're very fortunate to have our friends and guests here today to give us more color on such exciting times. We will start the day with a general intro on Brazil, discussing the basics and a general outlook for the energy sector. We'll then be joined by Eric Eiberg, S&P Head of Global Gas, LNG, and Low Carbon Gas Consulting, for a very much non-legal overview of the Brazilian energy market. We'll then have a session on hydrocarbons and new technologies and their applications in Brazil, followed by a discussion on tax and investment landscape. We'll then close the day with our keynote speaker, Carlos Padilha, Investment Director at Apex Brazil, and we thank him very much for making himself available. Please do feel free to ask questions as we go. For those attending online, please use the Zoom chat function, and we'll be monitoring those questions and asking them to our speakers here today. With that, I'll turn to Daniel and Eric. If you want to go and take the stage, please. Thank you.
So welcome here, everyone who's here and the folks online. Thank you for showing up, and thanks a lot for our friends at VNE for having us here. We're very excited. It's a new time in Brazil, and I think we want to share a little bit of what's happening with you guys on the ground. I know for a fact it's not very easy to get, let's say, the right info and intelligence when you work overseas or you don't have so much access there. The things that come here are not always very accurate. We're gonna say the good things and the bad things, but I think the idea is to spin in a way that you guys can understand the opportunities that are there that we foresee. And the things to look out. As a spoiler, I think there will be opportunities in certain areas. There are going to be many changes, at least in the near future, the first year in particular. And maybe Brazil hasn't done a great homework, but on a comparative basis, we're probably doing fine in terms of attracting capital and how the world and geopolitics works nowadays. I'm very happy that Eric decided to join us, because then I can do only a few numbers, but he's the numbers guy, so I'll try to focus on the overall picture. So it's three parts. I'm going to talk about Brazil, then the energy landscape in terms of mature markets, hydrocarbons, and then new technologies. For those who are online, we did ask these questions. It's always good to try and get a sense of how much of Brazil you guys know and are involved with. We'll try to make it in a way that it serves both the guys who really work with Brazil and the people who don't really know or work with Brazil but want to get an overall picture. So, when preparing these, I was kind of saying, what's going to be the first thing I tell the audience, and the first thing that came to my mind was a dream. That's the part on the top left. I wish I could say we were very stable, that we have a sustainable growth, that we are investment grade, that our currency is stable, that we get BIT protection, etc. We're not that. But at the same time, working in the region, I know that we're not a nightmare. That's the bottom left. We have strong and independent institutions. We have checks and balances. We have a very large reserve amount that has been a great protection for whatever is going in the world nowadays. We have, and as a lawyer, I think it's always good to point out, we have rule of law. And I think for Brazil, one of the interesting things is it really depends on the time window you're looking at. So in the short term, it can always seem like a roller coaster. But when you look at a midterm or long term, things tend to even out. And even in legal challenges, there's always something going on, as there is right now. One example is the new administration, how it was looking for the Petrobras divestments. They tried to suspend even the ones who had signed SPAs. That went on for 2.5 months. And then they, let's just say, they realized that the SPAs were signed, and they went through and closed the first deal and will close the other. So now it's easier to talk about that. The first day the news came out was very, very difficult, but I get the sense, and there are many stories I can share, that with time things tend to work out. We are very welcome to foreign investors. I always tell my clients, if something bad happens, it happens to everyone. Foreigners and Brazilians the same. We don't have, even when we have a more leftist government approach, we don't have issues against the foreigners. And we're also very friendly to hydrocarbons. One of our INPE clients was in an oil and gas event in Rio a year ago, and he said, I travel all around the world to have such an event, and nobody protesting, nothing against it. It's like really great nowadays. We're going to talk a lot about energy transition here, but Brazil plays both roles. We are a friendly jurisdiction, and we have an agenda to join OECD probably in the next 2 years. Now, on the right-hand side is just to show that we account for half of the GDP of the region. So when you look at Latin America, if you are able to do business in Brazil, you can, via one country, do half of the region, and some of the other are not really able to get investments nowadays. We are, a very large country, and we have our own issues, but we don't have big issues like religious, sectarian wars problems. Our population on the right-hand side, you can see, is very young. It's getting a little bit older, but still very young. And I think you don't need to see the numbers, just the way the picture looks like. And for what we're talking about, energy, we have a lot of natural resources, still abundant. So in terms of scaling up, you can do business in Brazil, and it's almost unlimited resources that you can get. And I think it's particularly important for energy transitions discussions we're having. On the economy, I think the left-hand side, what you see is that we had a deep dive 7 years ago during the impeachment process, before and after, that really hurt us, that we haven't fully recovered. When we were recovering, COVID came, but that came to everyone. But if you take that off the chart, we're kind of doing okay and doing the same movements of the world economy. On the right-hand side, we used to have inflation as our biggest problem. And now, this is October 22. I know that there's a more updated data that on the G20, we are in the top 3 countries that has the lower inflation rates right now. Our central bank was quite aggressive in the beginning. I have friends in the financial markets that say, if there's one thing we're good at is inflation, so we should be exporting that consultancy because now everybody's facing it. But Brazil has got that part under control. The part of the economy that is not under control is public spending, and that's the biggest challenge the current administration has right now. They've outlined their plan, needs to go through Congress, but it's definitely the point to see whether the economy will be sustainable. But inflation-wise and unemployment and the other things, we're doing fine. For those of you who are not that familiar with Brazil, we have a very existential problem of inequality. On the right-hand side, like 3 bullets that say in one sentence that there's a huge concentration on the top 1% in terms of wealth and distribution. So we had now a big change from left to right and right to left, but every government now is very focused on welfare distribution and a social network. And that's good because that makes the society more, not only more equal, but even with less of a problem in terms of what other countries are facing, unrest, etc. The flip side, as I said in the previous slide is obviously the public spending, because these things consume a lot of money from budget. So that's where we are right now. It's an economy that is fully functioning, capital markets working well, currency generally stable. I think the sense from, and I'm not an economist, but the sense from the economists that if we can handle public spending, we should be fine on a macroeconomic perspective. Now, I won't bother you with Brazilian politics. If anyone wants to discuss that later on, happy to do that. Probably need something stronger than the coffee that we have here, but it's a nice topic, but not for today. But I think a few things should be said. So first, on the first two bullets, it's a democracy, fully functioning, and we are a federation with states, 27 states, but differently from the U.S., there's more power concentrated in the union, so the states are less of an issue, meaning the union controls everything. We have independent elections every 4 years for the big terms, and so it's different from the U.S. The biggest elections is everything together, president, government, governors, Congress, etc. The other 2-year election is just the municipalities, which means the design that we have right now in terms of power will stick for 4 years, unless we have an impeachment, but will stick for 4 years. So, of course, it's still early in the game to really, we just did a 100-day milestone to understand how it will play out between the new president and the Congress, but this will stay for 4 years. We have an independent judiciary, and I should say, even going beyond, our institutions were really, really tested over the last 6-7 years, between car wash, Lava Jato, one impeachment, an attempt impeachment in the President Bolsonaro, the attacks we had on the Congress and in early January, and they worked. Again, when you were leaving those days, it looked like it was going to be messy, and it was messy, but overall, when you look, back, they worked. And not only they worked, they came out stronger. So we have, that's my point 6. We have, and that's one of the challenges for this president right now. He first took office 15 years ago. Obviously, everything was different. The society was different, no social media. The world was different. But probably the biggest difference is that the president at that power was really powerful. He's still powerful, but not as much. Congress took a lot of the power. Prosecutors are more powerful. The Supreme Court took a lot of power, because those things, they're like, they moving parts. So point 5 is we try to explain our system, which is a coalition presidentialism, but I've never seen anyone being able to summarize it in less than 10 minutes. And still it's difficult to get. We have like more than 20 parties. So he doesn't have majority, but I think the biggest point is 5, 6, and 7. We have a right-wing Congress. President doesn't have a majority. So any big change that he wants to do, he'll have to negotiate with Congress. And Congress has already given the messages that many of the reforms that were approved, labor reform, pension fund reform, macroeconomic reforms, they don't really want to overturn. Of course, President may be able to negotiate it, but so far he hasn't been able to do any of those things. So it's a bit of the checks and balances. Not that we have a great Congress, not that they're all really transparent and honest, but things work out that way. So I say this because you will see many speeches of our president in the media, and you know how these things work nowadays. Many times they're speaking to a subgroup or to some sort of effect, but that doesn't mean that what he's saying will actually come into force. Business-wise, again, I'm not covering the things that we Brazilians that live there are so worried about. But business-wise, most of what he said so far has not been implemented. And the last point is that we have ongoing or expected litigation against former President Bolsonaro. Maybe this is easier for you guys to picture. We have a former right-wing president being prosecuted in multiple fronts. The first prosecution is not the biggest case, but is about to be judged. which may put him out of being able to run for office for 8 years. Then we have other more serious to come. He's saying it's a fraudulent event, etc. I guess they had the same Netflix screenwriter, but it's very similar to another country that is facing something similar. Now, I'll turn over to Eric. Is that...
Perfect. No, thanks a lot, Danielle, and thanks for the introduction. I think you did the hard part. I've been working with the energy industry in Brazil for almost 20 years now, across the value chain, more focused on gas, LNG, power, but also increasingly new energies. And so I'll provide a bit more of a commercial and market perspective and a forward-looking perspective that leverages on the deep expertise that the S&P Global, IHS and S&P Global merged last year. The combined entity provides, we have a big research team down in Brazil and also consultants. I lived in Brazil for 4 years, a bit of an honorary Brazilian, but am down there quite often. So from a forward-looking perspective, wanted to start with the energy matrix. And as Danielle said, there was a tough period economically for Brazil from, let's call it, mid to late 2014 until 2020. And that's reflected in this chart on primary energy demand. So this is all energy demand in Brazil. And you can see it didn't grow since 2014. But we're coming out of that. We came out of that in 2021. We're seeing growth again in 2023. So that's the first thing I wanted to bring out. The second is that we've seen a shift in terms of the makeup of the primary energy demand in Brazil. And you can see the percentages at the bottom. But effectively, we've been shifting primarily to renewables from a growth perspective, also natural gas, and also what we call modern biomass. And we'll talk a little bit more specifically about renewables in the power sector, but the renewables growth, when you consider all overall energy demand, is pretty tremendous. Effectively, our expectation is that 7% of all primary energy demand comes from renewables by 2030. Again, gas shows a little bit of growth as well. But if we dive into, and I'll talk a bit more about natural gas, power, and new energies, hydrogen, CCUS. But if we start with the gas sector, the gas sector has been undergoing liberalization since the late 1990s. It didn't move much until the last 5 years. And so we had the first liberalization push in the late 90s. We had a natural gas law in 2009. Then we had a new gas law in 2021. And that's really spurred us to see significant changes in the Brazilian gas market and gas industry. In fact, at CERAWeek, I ran a panel and the ANP was there, and we chatted about the fact that of the ANP, the Brazilian regulators, top 12 priorities, 5 of them are natural gas right now. So a significant regulatory push and regulatory momentum on the gas industry side. And that's all the context for when we look at the market. And so we have seen diversification across the natural gas value chain, more players on the upstream side, the Brazilian independents, but also from a non-Petrobras perspective, taking a stronger role in the upstream. But we've also seen it in the transport business. We've seen it in the LDC business, and we're seeing it in bits and pieces. We don't have a liquid market by any means. We're trying to move step by step in that direction. And in this context, from a market perspective, I want to draw your attention to the left-hand side here where we show how is the Brazil gas market supplied. And historically, Bolivian gas played a huge role, an outsized role in supplying the market. That's the purple. And what you'll notice is that there's been a pretty continuous decline in terms of Bolivian imports. And that's going to continue. That's not going to change. Second is you see the red, which is LNG. And LNG has played a key role in terms of meeting the flexibility. You'll see that demand in the gas market year on, year out can change quite dramatically. That's because we have a hydro-dominated power market. And so when we have a lot of water, the demand for gas in the power sector is relatively low. When we don't have much water and we have dry seasons, you see the peaks, 14, 15, 21 being quite notable. And LNG helped provide that flexibility. Well, going forward, you also see that the green, which is domestic gas, continues to grow. But the dotted line is gross gas production, and it's really growing. And our expectation is it effectively doubles from 2020 to 2030. And why is that, and why aren't we seeing all that gas coming to the market? Part of it is because in Brazil, we use gas for reinjection for enhanced oil recovery. And that's to optimize the oil production that we're getting offshore. We also have infrastructure challenges in terms of bringing that gas to market, but it's a bit of the chicken and the egg problem because we also have a market issue. You'll see on the other side, which the market hasn't grown much in the last 8 or 10 years, and that's really driven by that economic challenge that Brazil went through. But now we think that starts to change. So on the right-hand side, you can see the market size. The green at the top is the power sector. I said that was very volatile, and you can see it is, but the rest is the base load, and the base load really hasn't changed much. But we do see that changing moving forward, and that's really driven by economic growth. But it's also driven by the fact that if you have a lot of gas supply available and a lot more domestic gas supply available than you've had in the past, then things start to change. Also with liberalization, everything is kind of coalescing around the same at the same time. So we're having liberalization really progress. We're seeing more players. We're having more supply. All of a sudden that starts to kickstart demand. And what does that mean? That means there's investment opportunities. Yep.
Eric, great slide. We could go back one. Does this mean that there's nothing coming in from Argentina? Is that the takeaway? I see the.
That's correct.
Okay.
So today there's nothing coming from Argentina. There's some discussions of grand plans of building greenfield gas pipelines to southern Brazil to bring Vaca Muerta gas. That's really tough to do. The economics are challenging. The market size is also challenging. You could also use existing infrastructure and go all the way back around through Bolivia. That's a much longer term possibility. So it means there's investment opportunities. So just to give a perspective here, one example, the offshore gathering pipelines that are taking all that gas that we talked about, the gas supply offshore to the market. We have 4 projects that are ongoing right now. 1 is under construction, 3 are in different stages. Those are billion or multi-billion-dollar pipelines each, and Petrobras really doesn't want to spend the capex on those pipelines anymore. So there's an interesting opportunity there from an infrastructure investment perspective. And those are known as the different routes or rotas, 3, 4, 5, and 6. You also have, you'll notice on the map that the red, which is the pipeline grid, is very coastal focused. And so there are opportunities to continue to extend it. There's also opportunities to go into the interior of Brazil. And there also are innovative solutions that people are pushing in order to get gas to market. Small scale LNG, CNG. You're looking at renewable natural gas, biomethane solutions in Brazil with a big ag market and especially around sugarcane refuse. So lots is happening. We're also building a number of LNG import facilities of varying sizes, but again, trying to connect the market. And so significant investment opportunities moving forward. Across the value chain, there continue to be movements around potential privatization, especially on the LDC side of the market. There are some questions as to whether some of the Petrobras divestment continues to move forward, but a lot has already happened, and so the market is moving. So switching gears a little bit on the power sector, if we just look at the generation capacity and how that has evolved and what we expect going forward, as I said, it's a very hydro-dominated market. That's the dark blue. It's been shifting more to solar and wind. Just to give one statistic, from 2021 to 2022, we doubled the amount of solar capacity in Brazil in 1 year. And so it's really ramping up. That's happening in the free market. So about 1/3 of the power market in Brazil is a free market, 2/3 is a regulated market. That depends upon LDCs, driving auctions, and signing long-term PPAs. The rest is the free market, which is where most of the renewables are participating. There is uncertainty around the future of the regulated market, and that's because of that red line that I'm showing there. That's the reserve margin. And you typically think about a reserve margin in power markets, 15% is healthy. I would say the one big caveat here is in Brazil, because hydro is so important. Reserve margin numbers as a metric are okay, but they don't tell the whole story. But it still is directionally showing that we're kind of oversupplied, and that's because of the economic situation and then 2020 happening. And so we have an oversupply, especially for the LDCs in the regulated market, but the free market is still investing very significantly. Well, what's happening? People are going away from the LDCs, going into the free market and signing new PPAs, and the LDCs are left with the oversupply. So the free market is certainly where the focus is. There is uncertainty around new regulated auctions. They're likely going to happen, but just in smaller numbers. But solar and wind goes from 20% of capacity today to 40% by 2030. It's just astounding how quickly things are changing in Brazil. And one of the hot topics today is offshore wind in Brazil. We've had more than 175 gigawatts of projects that are in various development phases. And that means they have open environmental license processes ongoing. So these are certainly not all going to happen. But it's impressive how much interest there is. And it's also a lot of the usual suspects in the global offshore wind industry who are there. So that's folks like Shell, Total, Ocean Winds, which is EDP and Engie. And so, again, you see Iberdrola as well, a lot of the usual suspects there. And what are they thinking about? They're thinking about the fact that the one big challenge that Brazil has is around power transmission and connecting the renewables to the market areas. And so if you do it offshore, then you can just build a transmission line straight to the market area. So particularly in the Southeast, that's quite interesting. I think the challenge that we have is effectively offshore wind CapEx is very, very expensive. And in fact, we estimate it's 2.5 times higher than onshore wind CapEx, which is that chart on the left. And that makes it, again, a challenge. But this is not something that just Brazil faces. This is something that we see globally, and we've already built 60 gigawatts of global offshore wind. But if you look at the right-hand side, you can see the levelized cost of electricity, or LCOE. And that blue shaded area is offshore wind versus solar and onshore wind. And you can see it's anywhere from kind of 2 to 3x today, but getting better over time, but still 1.5 to 2x or more in terms of overall economics. Why is that? Well, in Brazil, onshore wind has some of the best conditions of any place in the world. Capacity factors are 40 to 60%. You don't see that in many places. Most places you see 15, 20, 25%, 30% is great, but you have very high capacity factors. The conditions are really favorable onshore. There's also, as Danielle said, not a lack of opportunity in land. And so onshore wind makes a lot of sense, but for various specific reasons, offshore wind is being pushed. The Lula administration has indicated interest. And so as our power analyst told me yesterday, at the stroke of a pen, we could have an offshore wind auction, and that's why everybody is doing this and pursuing this. At the end of the day, it comes down to getting that established policy support mechanisms that you see in the success cases in the world for offshore wind to make this happen. But certainly an interesting opportunity. And then shifting, there's a bit of a tangential relationship between offshore wind and green hydrogen, but we've seen a number of green hydrogen projects announced in Brazil. There's 20 MOUs, 15 gigawatts of electrolyzer capacity associated with that. So it's a huge, huge number. And, from a green H2 perspective, effectively, you need to have renewable power, connect that to power your electrolyzers to then produce the green hydrogen, mostly for exports, because in Brazil, you don't have a huge hydrogen market. It's 90% refinery demand. So it's really looking at, especially the EU, but also other parts of the world. So the renewable power is the really critical factor. And there are 70 gigawatts in the renewable power onshore pipeline today that would love to find demand in PPAs. And so green hydrogen provides an outlet and is interesting. The other thing I want to draw attention to is unlike offshore wind, where economics are tough, economics for green hydrogen in Brazil are actually quite comparable. So the magic number typically is around $3 per kilogram we think about from a green hydrogen perspective, not looking at subsidies, not looking at the various support, policy support. And from an onshore wind perspective and solar perspective, it's effectively there. So certainly, as we know, when we have policies in the US like the IRA, which is providing $3 per kilogram of support, that it is going to be important to have that policy support. But it's on both sides. It's not just the producer side, which would be Brazil in this case. It's also the off-taker, because at the end of the day, to make these projects happen, you need to have long-term financing. You need to have long-term offtake. And so it's on both sides where you see the policy support. There's been some intergovernment discussions with Germany and Brazil about this topic, and certainly quite a bit of interest. And so we'll continue to see more. This is the very beginning of that journey from a green hydrogen perspective. Yep.
For those 20 MOUs you're talking about, what type of players are involved? You gave a sense on the offshore wind. Is this?
It's pretty similar. So you'll see a lot of yes, there are some developers who are small teams and trying to develop a project, but you'll also see Equinor and Petrobras have an MOU. You'll see a number of the other players that are especially looking at the European market, who are getting involved in these projects from a venture perspective. So
Many of the European utility-based companies like Engie, Enel, Iberdrola, all of them are looking at those stuff as well.
And again, because the economics are quite attractive when you think about it relative to other opportunities.
And are they power to fuels transactions they're looking at doing with the hydrogen, or ammonia or methanol, or all of the above?
All of the above. So I think no one's figured out, are we going to be transporting via ammonia? Are we going to be transporting liquid hydrogen? Are we going to be using methanol? So I think everything is on the table at this point. But certainly looking at all of those angles. And again, mostly for export markets. So that will be continuing to be an interesting topic. And the last is on new energies, is around carbon capture sequestration. And Brazil's really well positioned. So just to give an idea, around the Paris agreements, if we are to meet those, there are estimates from S&P Global, but also from others, and the IEA and others who put out forecasts, who say that CCS needs to grow from today, which is about 40 million tons globally, to something around 2 gigatons to 4 gigatons per year. So it's a huge opportunity, obviously lots of interest to pursue. And if you look at what our estimates are for Brazil, and this is a very conservative estimate, there's a lot of depleted reservoirs in the Campos Basin that are interesting. There's the saline aquifers in Paraná, but there's also Santos, there's others here. So this is an extremely conservative number, but you're talking about maybe 15 gigatons. That would be 500 million tons of sequestration for 30 years. So Brazil could be a big player. And the challenge is, okay, well, how do you connect the value chain across, the CCUS value chain? And where we're really focused is looking at the steel industry, because Brazil is a big exporter of steel. Green steel is a very important topic these days, and really targeting the European markets. The issue there is that Brazil targets China and US and not Europe as much. So it's a bit of shifting in markets, but certainly opportunities there. The geology is fantastic. So we certainly expect this to continue to be a big topic. Petrobras today technically does about 4 or 5 million tons when they're using the CO2 for enhanced oil recovery. But it's not permanent storage today, but it certainly could shift to that. And so the capabilities are there. And so that's why we think it's an interesting topic. But covered a lot, tried to cover the gas power new energy space in 20 minutes. So I think now Danielle and I are happy to take questions
Just a few more slides.
from, perfect. So thanks everyone for the S&P perspective. I'll give it back to Danielle.
Yes, thanks. And I'll rush through here because obviously Eric's numbers and graphics are so much better. I was not planning to use legal terms, but maybe I'll do that. Just no, but I'll just cover a few other topics like upstream. My partner Fernando will explain better about the new opportunities, which is the best part. But just so you have an overview, the chart on the left is our production. You'll see that the blue post south is where we really kicked off, and Campos Basin and then Santos Basin, but that's really declining. But there's an opportunity there because many projects were sold, shallow water opportunities. Then the green part is the pre-salt, which used to be our future, now is our present, but also the future. But both of them, when you see the chart to the right, both charts, you see it's for few players. So Petrobras has 2/3, the 64%, and on the 36%, if you get Shell, Equinor, Repsol, Galp, those guys, they really dominate with a few other IECs. But the onshore, even though it seems very small, that's really where, from a transaction and development perspective, that's really where the price is. And that's what Fernando will cover in the next section. So natural gas, it's as Eric said, it was legally open in 1997, but for real only in the last 5 years. And I think for international players, there's opportunities focused on the LNG terminals and LNG to power projects. LNG to power, we've had 5 big projects and we have more than 5 ongoing right now. We have a huge infrastructure issue. So for any folks focus on gas infrastructure, there's a big gap. And with these new players that Fernando will cover, many of them don't want to be integrated companies. So they really need people with the capital and the expertise and really the business decision to invest in that. So it's an ongoing process of liberalization, but we think that's really where the prize is. Refineries, I won't cover because it's really a part of the market that we didn't really open. So when you add Petrobras capacity, that's the 2 green on the left, it's 85%. That's why we call it de facto monopoly. And then there's a big legal discussion that we won't cover here, but they had an agreement with the antitrust agency to sell those assets. They haven't sold many of them. That's an issue. The new government does not want to sell refineries, so it's a political decision versus a legal commitment. And also in Brazil, well, I think globally last year or even currently, fuel pricing is a political hot topic, but in Brazil it's probably a top 5 hot topic. The fuel pricing is unregulated, but Petrobras with 85% obviously is who controls that. And for a number of years, it's been operating based on the international price. And that's a big discussion now right there. But really is a market without a lot of opportunities. Yep.
You made a great point. Could you go back on, you said it's unregulated. I always assumed it was, but really it's because of the political control on Petrobras. That if they've got 85% of the retail, then therefore it looks regulated. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
But back to, you said fuel. Are we talking just refined products? Are we talking what fuels?
Oh, fuel is the next slide. But to your point, Petrobras is a state-controlled company, but it really operates in 90% of what it does, including fuel, as a private company. So they decide with their board and their officers what the price they're going to do. So the issue, as any big private corporation that controls a big part of certain market, is antitrust. So they have a whole thing with the antitrust agency. But other than that, they set their price. It's their board, and it's not regulated. They are listed in New York, SEC, etc. Now, of course, there's a big discussion on how the federal administration can influence the decision of the board. But Petrobras, over the last 4 years, grew a lot, let's say, its corporate governance. So it has a lot of roadblocks or things that will make it more difficult for a political decision, because we did have under Dilma's administration, they really controlled the price. And it's one of the reasons why Petrobras almost went under. So nowadays, there's a political force trying to drive to control the price, but on a legal and a market perspective is not operating right now. But if you ask me how this will play out over the next 4 years, that's one of the billion-dollar questions in Brazil.
And today, my question is, if the CEO is appointed by the president,
Yeah.
right, how many of the board members are appointed by?
The majority. The majority is appointed by the union, but, and it's a question right now, there used to be ministers like secretaries, and now they are not anymore. There are people from the market with a lot of scrutiny. There are committees within Petrobras that approve their names or not. They're changing right now the board. But let me say like that, officers of Petrobras can be prosecuted on a personal basis from various agencies in the government. So we've had, even under President Bolsonaro, when the war came out, there was a big pressure on price. And he even changed the CEO 3 times because he wanted the prices to be lowered, and the prices were not because the commodity was going up. And he changed the CEOs, but the price was never not what the market was. So there is a big uncertainty on political willingness and the ability to implement that because of all those protections that were built over the last 5 years. Now, I'm not saying that they won't be able to overcome, but I don't think nobody really knows the answer. There's definitely a discussion there. There will definitely be a political pressure, but over the last 5 years, that was never an ability to go around it, to circumvent it. And on the next slide, I cover a little bit of fuel, like general downstream. So fuel on the left, natural gas on the right. Those are very open markets. Petrobras sold their downstream position. So you see the 3 big companies there, and even the others, they are 100% private, some of them listed. So it's really an open market. And probably the most important thing for energy transition purposes here is to say that sugarcane is a big part of our matrix, ethanol, sugarcane-based ethanol, and that's one of the differentiating points of Brazil, that we, in terms of how we fuel our cars, we are already a step ahead because you can fuel your car with 100% ethanol, and even the gasoline that we use in the pumps has a 30% sort of a mix. So Brazil is already, and then these graphs, Eric's, were much better, but shows a little bit how we are already, and you can see sugarcane on the left, the 2021 Brazil energy sources accounting for 16%. That's on both sugarcane ethanol, that's on both ways it was used. And here on the right, you can see our power matrix, how renewable we are, because it's hydro, wind, and solar, and the numbers that we give, and Eric gave more updated numbers, but every month we are falling behind because of how solar is growing in Brazil. It's on a generated distribution basis, so it's really small plays by companies everywhere, which is a challenge, and Eric touched a little bit, but it's a real challenge on going forward regulation for the power market. 20 years ago, when I joined the firm and my colleague was here, they redesigned the power market and it was called the new power model. But that's 20 years old. And you know, things changed dramatically and are still changing. Liberalization will go to a next level. So Eric said about the free market. The pipeline, what's in the pipeline from a regulatory perspective, that's going to be free for everyone, including residential users. Generated distribution, which is outside the LDCs, is booming. We had subsidies for wind and solar. They were, they're going away, so there was still a window for the last projects that submitted, but we don't need them anymore because they are economically viable. But this situation where we are right now is that the way the market is currently designed, as it's working and new investment, doesn't really fit into the regulation. So we expect to have a lot of, we're already having, but we'll have even more changes. And yeah, I covered that. So, and I think Eric covered really well on the numbers, of course. So in terms of the framework for new technologies, I put these 3 first because they are let's say, the greener of the green. So all of these three are not that regulated yet. And when I say not regulated, is that we have bills of law in Congress. We have a discussion on the two, CCS and hydrogen, who's going to have the authority in terms of the federal agencies. And we don't move as fast as the US moves. So even our discussion on subsidies, the government says they're going to announce something in May. I wouldn't expect something as big as the IRA, not because they don't want to, because this government is very pro-energy transition because of their beliefs. And I said, I don't want to get into politics, but I think on every stance that they can be 100% opposite of the prior administration, they do that. And prior administration was not a champion of energy transition. These guys are. So we do expect things to come, but the problem is that we don't have a lot of space in our budget. But as Eric said, and then we go to the next slide. So these two second generation biofuels and biogas and biomethane, they are operating. We need regulation to come, but we don't need a law. We don't need to decide who the regulator is. We already know. So it's really the regulators falling behind a little bit on the technology, but they're catching up. And we have like, I don't know how many projects in the firm for biogas and biomethane right now that are already working. The ones that we work on, and from a law firm perspective, right? The ones we work on CCS and hydrogen are on the MOU stage. And sometimes even just regulatory research. The ones on here are really ongoing projects with contracts and financing, et cetera. But the forces that will drive this forward are the incentives and subsidies that we'll learn more in the next 30 to 60 days. Stay tuned. We have for E&P companies a mandatory R&D spending that many of them intend to use in these because they have to use in the country. And for some of the big players, 1% is a huge number. And that talks a little bit with the last bullet, which is for many of these big companies operating there, and big companies like I would mention the IECs and the utility companies, many of them have been in Brazil for decades. They see Brazil as a tool to achieve their global targets, which are very aggressive. Because as I said, Brazil has scalability. They know the region. We have cheap resources. So what they are focusing right now is to try to help the regulators and even Congress to put this in place. Of course, lobbying for incentives. And in terms of offshore wind, as Eric said, even though the numbers are not good right now, all of them have submitted pre-projects to the administration. And for biogas, and in terms of the auction, we had an auction. So we still have the auctions in the power market, the regulated market, and they can use as tools to incentivize source by source. So we've had recently biogas projects that are very good projects for all the developers and people financing it. Yes, the energy, the power is a bit more expensive, but again, it's a decision of the regulator. We haven't had one for offshore wind, but it's just recently regulated. So I guess most of those companies, that's what they're doing. They are doing the pre-projects, and the licensing of these things that are new are quite difficult because it hasn't been done. But I think that's where they're betting. And with that, there are takeaways, but I think I covered most of that already. So we hit the limit now, probably a good time for Q&A. So I know people here can just ask questions, but I was told people in Zoom could always also. So whoever's online, feel free to use the Zoom tool. And happy to answer any questions you guys have. Yes?
Thank you again for the presentation. It was excellent. I'm a equipment rental business, and we've been in Brazil about 15 years. It's gone okay. We've made some mistakes. Our biggest mistake has been the currency devaluation. Would you mind giving some opinions around that? Kind of more specifically, we invested at about a 1.9 to 2.3 dollar to reais, and now we're 4.9. It's not moving the needle as much.
Yeah. So the currency, it was one on my dream slide, the first slide, right? That I wish I had a better answer for you. My clients, they tell me, well, I don't know if your contracts are real denominated.
Yes.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yes.
So inflation covers a bit of that, not all of the losses that you guys have hit. But I guess some of this market, I think, will be more open to not 100% dollar denominated, but we see more. I mean, the liberalization of the gas markets and some other markets, we've seen people that have been able to get some sort of dollar exposure to their contracts. But otherwise, hedging is still expensive. So other clients that I have, they always look for opportunities to reinvest, even though sometimes was not their plan A, but to reinvest and wait for the currency to be in a better shape. Probably not a great answer. I don't know if you but it's part of our reality, I guess.
And Daniel, the ability to do US dollar denominated PPAs is something new, right? How much have you seen that kind of ongoing over the past
Yeah,
few
good
years?
question. Well, it's booming. We were doing those before the law was changed. So now we have a law that says it's allowed, so it's clear cut. We had an opinion that it was legal. So we have a lot of dollar denominated PPAs. The LNG market is dollar denominated. The offshore gathering pipelines that Eric denominated are USD off takes. So the exposure to dollar is getting bigger. I'm not saying the market will be dollarized. I don't think so. But it's a bit of that. And you're right. The dollar denominated PPAs are booming, especially for exporting companies. Yes, we have. Yeah. Let me say what's been done so far. So they've created a Secretary of Energy Transition that didn't exist in Brazil. They have a very reliable person there. As Eric said, the hub in the Northeast was Germany has been investing quite a lot in trying to be the major off-taker for the ammonia. Now, under President Bolsonaro, our relationships with Europe were not at their best. And when Lula took office, because of his beliefs, and again, trying to make a different point, he's very close to the EU right now. So the Chancellor and a big delegation of Germany were in Brazil 4 weeks ago, something like that. And I don't want to say there was not much concrete resolutions out of that. But for me, a clear sign that, as Eric said, we don't have a liquid market for hydrogen. But I think on the offtake side, I'm assuming both governments will work on a sort of a governmental framework for hydrogen. And on top of that, as I said, we expect in May a package of energy transition to be announced. I'm sure they know what the IRA means in terms of competition. To the extent they can find some space in the budget or create something smart, we do expect them to bring definitely a big announcement. Whether it will be enough to move the needle, we don't know. But I do expect those things to come out in the next few months.
I think that's right. I think it'll move the needle. I think the question is, how does it compete with the IRA? And the IRA, of course, is transformational.
Maybe it'd be interesting to see your thoughts and views also around the recent decision on the public government to adopt a measure to tax the export on crude oils, and how to be considered a trend of the new administration to try to offset and compensate the federal deficit on the public budget. So I think that would be nice to expand on that.
Okay, I'll be quick because we have a tax partner coming up, but I will say, again, he doesn't have the majority in Congress. He has a big problem with public spending deficit. That measure, of course, was not well received, not only by the oil industry, but by any exporting industry. In Brazil, in terms of our GDP, if you get exporting, it's quite heavy, and they're quite influential in Congress. The measure was for 120 days, and it will only survive if Congress approves. Right now, we don't expect Congress to approve, but it's still a question mark. But the sense there is that it was, I don't want to say a desperate measure, but they knew the price they were going to pay in terms of reliability, etc. But the repercussion on, again, all the industries, if you take the agribusiness, it's our biggest engine in the economy. But we also have mining and stuff. All those people together in the same table, against the tax on export with the right-wing Congress we have, the pro-business Congress we have. We don't think that's going to be how they're going to make up for the deficit. Now, how they're going to make up for the deficit, I'll leave for Camila to give you the answer shortly. Well, thanks, right? I think with that,
No, that was great. Very informative. Thank you both. I guess with this, we turn to the second session on the Brazilian upstream markets. And just want to welcome Fernando Xavier and James Langhope.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. One of the things I was thinking about the topic we're discussing here today is that, well, I have been working with oil and gas, dedicated to oil and gas and biofuels for 15 years. Daniel, I think 20 or more. One of the things that we do is not only about legal opinions, negotiating SPAs, but also to analyze the market and do presentations like this one. And I was looking through all the more than 15 presentations I've been doing all these years to look for a trend. And one of the initial things I saw was that in one of the presentations about opportunities and perspectives of Brazil I did in Houston in 2009, most of the subject was about the pre-salt. So one of the big changes, and I think this is a landmark today, is that from that time to today, at that time I was talking 100% about oil and gas conventional. Now this is the first time, I think this is the first year that we spend more than half of the presentation, more than half of the time talk about new technologies, new energy sources, and how that trends will change in Brazil. But that doesn't mean that oil and gas will have a smaller place in Brazil. Quite to the contrary, oil and gas is actually bigger than ever in Brazil. We are reaching records every month, and I think this year we just reached the mark of 4 million barrels per day, which is great to Brazil, because when I started to work with petroleum in Brazil, it was 1.5 million, I think. So, but there are many things in terms of these changes and these trends that I want to highlight in the next 5 slides. And the main message is that the oil industry that we had in 2009 is not the same in Brazil, because we were talking about a market that was fully dominated by Petrobras and a few majors. The majors were still struggling to get higher than 10% market share. Now we have more than 1/3 of the market on the hand of private companies or foreign companies. But also we have more than one industry, oil and gas industry in Brazil, because we had this offshore deep water fields dominating the scenario in Brazil. And we are just seeing the different types of oil industry that we have seen in the US, for example, or in Europe, for example, and we have never seen them really robust in Brazil. We are seeing them they are just born in Brazil. So one of the main drives of that change is obviously the divestment plan of Petrobras. We had Petrobras as this big oil monster in Brazil for more than 50 years. And it started with the onshore in the northeast part of Brazil. Some small fields that are still producing today, they were with Petrobras until 5 years ago. So it's really hard to imagine how a company can operate giant fields producing almost 1 million barrels per day at the deep water pre-salt basin in Brazil, and also holding marginal stripper wells at the same time. So this was completely out of sense. And in 2015, that started to change when Petrobras, when the federal administration took the rational decision of moving out of the less profitable business and selling that to the market. So this was a very important decision for Petrobras to move out of the onshore in Brazil and also from shallow water mature fields. And it all started to change the face of the Brazilian oil industry, because it really gave way to not only these oil fields, but Petrobras was selling them as clusters. So each one of these sales, you see that we're calling Pampa and Chova cluster, Macau cluster, because not only the oil field, but the infrastructure, gas processing, pipelines, electric substations, all of the infrastructure related to these clusters have been sold to the market. So all of the structure, the onshore structure in Brazil is now in the hand of private companies. And as you can see, it started really slow. There was some challenge in the beginning because of it has never been done in Brazil before. There were regulatory challenge. There were the oil regulator was not really prepared to do all the transition so fast. Also some questioning in terms of governance from Petrobras, but as from 2017, it really started to get traction. And we saw in 2000, even during the pandemics, we saw multiple clusters being sold at the same year. And this is just part of the picture because if we take the full list, there are more than 50 projects that we have been involved, and which created what we call now the new market of independence in Brazil. Of course, some of these companies have been in the market forever, since, for example, Perenco, BW, but these companies had no place in Brazil so far. And we have seen not only this independence, this global independence coming to Brazil and finding finding an opportunity to grow and to bring enhanced and recovery technologies to Brazil, but also we saw a very interesting phenomenon, which is new companies being created to administer to manage these resources. For example, 3R, Origin, Carmo Energy, all of these companies came from nothing, and now they are managing thousands of barrels per day and increasing. And one of the interesting thing about this company is that they have been able to go public very quickly because they were acquiring assets that have been proven. They are playing on mature basins with a lot of potential, with track records, a background of very low recovery rates from Petrobras. And it was really easy to certify the resources, and it was really easy to understand that Petrobras had made pretty much nothing in the last 10 years to increase and enhance recovery from these reservoirs. So there's a lot to do in the next years. This just came out today. It just confirms exactly what I have been saying for the last 3 years. There was the initial phase of these companies, what I call the round one. The round one is the divestment plan. Now I have the beginning of the round two, which is, okay, the divestment plan has been reaching an end, not only because of the new administration, but also because there is the assets have been sold. So the source for the assets have been, is ending. And without the new clusters from Petrobras, what is the option for these companies? The initial option is consolidation, partnerships, increased synergy, and we have been seeing this partnership being negotiated in the background, and we expect that for the next 2 years, a lot of these M&As or strategic alliance will be announced to the market. We have been involved in some of them, and our expectation is that this second round will actually shape what the Brazil mature onshore independent industry will be for the next 10 years. Just to give you one of the examples of how these clusters are formed and how they create a lot of opportunities in several markets, not only the actual exploration and production. The Alagoas clusters, which is not even the biggest, was sold to Origin Energia, which is one of these companies that have been created just to take the opportunity of the Petrobras divestment. The Alagoas cluster is formed by, I don't know, 7 fields, 10 fields, most of them very mature, but they have 150 miles of pipelines. They have underground storage facilities. They have treatment stations. So they are positioned, all the infrastructure and the operational basis is positioned quite close to the coast. And it is in front of a new exploratory basin in Brazil, which is expected to produce a lot of gas in the next 10 years. So these companies are positioning themselves to be a logistics and infrastructure cluster and in hub for this new production hubs in Brazil. And Origin is really focused on the new markets. So it has just been announced last week that ANP, the oil and gas regulator in Brazil, approved the business plan for Origin to do natural gas underground storage in Brazil, which is something new. We have been discussing that for at least 10 years, but we have never really seen a project going on. And apparently this will be a milestone for Origin that will be replicated in other fields. We are seeing the same thing with Potiguar cluster, Riacho da Forquilha cluster, Carmópolis clusters. All of these clusters are now, the companies are now reviewing how they can use the infrastructure to provide services to the market that have not been provided so far by Petrobras. So to summarize, how we see the work ahead for these companies and for the market, we are seeing a three-step plan for all of these clusters. Initially recover because Petrobras was not investing on the fields, on the onshore and shallow water fields for at least 10 years. Most of the wells were non-operative. Most of the pumps had to be replaced. So companies like PetroReconcavo, that was one of the one that acquired one major cluster, I think 4 years ago, was able to increase production by 40% in just 12 months. So you can see how much companies could create in terms of value in a very quick, short term. So we are right now on this initial recovery phase where the companies are investing intensively to do the homework, basically. They are taking this field that have been temporarily abandoned by Petrobras. They were hibernating for many years, and they are just replacing, maintaining things to increase cash flow, to increase production on a very short term. And then we are starting to enter, depending on the timeline of each of these clusters, where we're starting to see a lot of investments and announcement in terms of improving. And that means we are taking these fields that have been using technology from 40 to 30 years ago, and companies are reviewing how to apply enhanced recovery technologies from the very basics to also reviewing the well design and the production design of the fields of the clusters, adding unconventional technologies, using horizontal wells instead of the old technology of having one well beside the other. And we are also seeing things like gas underground storage, as I said, Origin starting the business for gas underground storage in Alagoas is really something that will represent a landmark in Brazil. And expand. And expand is something that we are really looking into in Brazil because this is actually what will define the market for 20 to 30 years. And we really believe that even with all the energy transition, with all the new technologies and the renewables, Brazil has a lot of space, and there is a window of opportunity for Brazil to take advantage of all the mature basins that have a lot of resources to produce, but also the new frontier basins that have never really received the level of investment that they needed, onshore and offshore. Just for a matter of comparison, Brazil has today 5,000 wells producing, which is almost nothing when compared to mature markets like the US with, 1 million wells producing as of today. So when you look to the map of Brazil and making a comparison with the pipelines, it's the same thing with oil. All the oil is on the coast, offshore, onshore is all margin, in the margin of Brazil. But we see there is a lot of potential, and Eneva was the first independent company to do that in Brazil, to go to the countryside of Brazil and produce, I think now they produce 10% of the gas in Brazil out of nothing. There was no producing basin in Parnaíba 10 years ago, and now they're producing 10% of natural gas in Brazil. And we believe there's a lot of potential in at least 2 or 3 onshore basins, but also a lot of offshore basins. And as there is this perception of the federal administration, not only this one, but even the last one, that there is a window of opportunity for the next 30 years for countries like Brazil to take the maximum advantage of our natural oil and gas resources. There has been a lot of change in terms of regulation to take all the red tape in terms of giving the companies all the access they need to these resources. So we are now working fully with the open acreage system. All of these areas, the available areas, are now fully available on this permanent offer system that the regulator created. So companies are allowed to make their bids and request ANP to start a new bidding round at any time. And we are now seeing ANP doing that twice a year, which is a good frequency, because we had times in Brazil that we spent more than 5 years without any bidding round. And we know the kind of loss that creates in terms of long term in the market. And now we are having twice a year, we are having this permanent offer bidding rounds with the areas being chosen by the companies themselves, not by the government. So there is a sense of opportunity, and there's also the opportunity for companies to allow the creation of new basins. And we are now working with 2 of these cases where there are no blocks designed, but the companies have interest in some of the areas, and we are discussing with the government. There is a formal procedure to do that. We are discussing with the government the creation of new basins. And I would say that one of these new frontiers that we need to look into Brazil is the equatorial margin. There is this discussion between the environmental departments of the government and the energy departments of the government of whether it is in the interest of Brazil to create a new oil and gas basin, especially offshore because of the environmental concerns. But apparently the oil team is winning so far. But this is something that we're going to see in the next couple months for maybe, because Petrobras is investing heavily on the equatorial margin. They have all the equipment, they have all the contracts in place. They are paying huge amounts of money on a daily basis, waiting for the license. Petrobras has done everything that was required by the environmental agency, so it's all depending on a political decision. We know that Lula knows how to talk with the market and play with the audiences, but Lula is not an environmentalist, and he has taken a lot of advantage with the discovery of the pre-salt, and we think that there's a big chance that he will do the same with the equatorial margin. But also, because I really believe on the potential of the onshore in Brazil, and also on the potential of the onshore to be less controversial as when compared to the equatorial margin, we are seeing a lot of pieces being moved on the background for new basins to be opened in Brazil, new frontiers being opened in Brazil onshore, especially with something that we tried to do 10 years ago, but I think now Brazil is mature enough to do that, which is the shale. And if that is really something that happens in the next 2 years, I think that we'll see a boom. So we are positioning ourselves in the law firm, but also in the market, in all these committees and commissions that we are part of, to make sure that all the past mistakes that we have done as a whole, as an industry in Brazil, will not be made again, because the San Francisco Basin, which is quite in the middle of Brazil, the Paracins Basin is also in the middle of Brazil, has the potential. They have the potential to be as disruptive as has happened in the U.S. 15 years ago, and they are very well positioned in terms of taking the oil to the countryside of Brazil, doing something that has never been done before, and creating value, creating wealth where Brazil needs the most. So as you can see, all of these blocks in the map, these are areas available. We have more than 1,000 areas available and almost 1,000 new areas being under study by the government that should be included in the next 1 or 2 years. So a lot of potential. The signing bonus and the economics have been really reduced. The government's taking the time to understand that this is a window of opportunity. And this is the trend that we have been looking for in the next couple of years, and the trend that we believe will really shape the industry for the next 10 years or more. The takeouts of that is that this is a very capital-intensive industry. The things that are happening right now with the cluster that have already been sold by Petrobras will demand a lot of partnerships, a lot of service providers, and a lot of money as well, of course. So financing is something that we are working hard. And the new industry, the expansion as I said, the three-step recover, improve, and expand. The expansion is something that I think will be the anchor for long-term business in Brazil, not only taking the advantage of these mature fields that will last for 10 or 15 years, but at least 30 years, I think. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Fernando. That was fantastic. For those of you who don't know me, my name is James Longhofer. I'm a partner in the finance group, and I've been asked to give sort of a brief overview in terms of the financing trends we're seeing for 2023, particularly focused on the U.S., really as a point of comparison with what we're seeing in Brazil and what Fernando and Danielle spoke about. Again, there's a lot to get through, and I think we're already running behind schedule a little bit, so I'll try to cram this in within 5 to 10 minutes. With the understanding too, I think a lot of people are getting hungry and probably are eager to get to their lunch. I think to the extent that the story that you've heard so far from Fernando is essentially one of fragmentation and taking advantage of new opportunities from divestitures, I think the story in the U.S. is basically the opposite, in the sense where we're seeing new opportunities in the form of consolidation, where essentially, and these were all trends that predated the pandemic, really coming out for a last restructuring cycle. But really, the pandemic did accelerate quite a bit, where both on the financing side and also on the company side, you see the market consolidating and focusing on bigger players. And I want to focus on three kinds of financing. Really, these are all within the private banking sphere. Essentially, let's put aside the public capital markets right now and just focus on private sources of capital. One would be, and this is something I'm sure everyone in this room is familiar with, are traditional reserve-based loans that you see from top-tier banks. They're a very basic concept, a form of asset-based lending, but basically you underwrite a borrowing base based off of a company's oil and gas reserves. And again, that tends to be the main kind of focus financing that most companies look for, comes from your traditional banks like JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, Bank of America. And those deals still dominate the market, but there have been fewer and fewer of them. Then you also have direct lending, which I kind of view as a catch-all term for any sort of non-bank lending that's coming from, say, like PE funds, the credit arms of those PE funds, hedge funds, sort of alternative investors who are looking for riskier assets. And these kinds of financings tend to fill a gap for incremental capital that banks really don't want to underwrite. So think of your developmental capital, again, like new companies. Some are also adding on additional leverages that banks don't directly want to provide. Then the other one too, which we've seen quite a bit of in the last 2 years, are asset-based financings or asset-based securitizations. So again, this is an old technology, an old form of financing, but it's expanded into a new market where, again, people are used to ABS issuances, but we hadn't really seen that up until the last couple of years in the domestic E&P space, where we've had a number of upstream companies go through that process, take mature assets that, again, don't require much work and there's low engineering risk, drop them into a bankruptcy mode SPV, also layer on a number of hedges as well, and then issue debt securities in order to finance those. And again, particularly within the last couple of years, those have been very attractive forms of financing, particularly for companies trying to monetize right now when the domestic E&P or the domestic M&A markets have been a little bit slow. So on the RBL side, again, I'm going to do this at a very glib and high level, just given the limited time we have. But for those of you not familiar with RBL, again, talking about a borrowing base, usually redetermined once or twice a year. Banks have complete discretion coming up with that borrowing base. But it tends to be relatively cheap and flexible capital, a good source of liquidity, and usually relatively cheap pricing as well. Talking about like SOFR, now the replacement for LIBOR, plus 3 or 4%, depending on how drawn you are. On the direct lending side, again, a lot more flexible in terms of structure and being able to work around existing debt or equity investments, but tends to be a lot more expensive. There you can see the capital costs anywhere from, say, let's say 8, 9, 10% all in, up to 15, 20% all in, particularly once you factor in any sort of equity kicker that may be thrown to help juice returns. Then on the asset-based securitization side, significantly cheaper fixed-term debt, but a little bit more, a little more expensive to go through the documentation process, particularly because you have to do a fair amount of investor education, because most of the investors coming into that are industry agnostic and they aren't as familiar with the E&P space. But there you're talking about anywhere from, say, 5, 6, 7%, although we've seen that definitely ticking up as interest rates have generally gone up within the last few months. So what do we expect to see for 2023? Again, it's really been a story of consolidation and roll-up. And again, really, this is true on both the bank side and then also on the company side. So what we've seen are really larger deals, but fewer deals. The major US banks are still really open for business, but they tend to be pretty selective right now. They're very focused on size, the leverage and credit profile, particularly after getting effective sort of acquisitions, which should be accretive. And also, too, working with existing sponsor relationships and focusing on management teams that have a strong background. This has been part of the reason why they've been so selective, too, though, is also there are fewer players in the market. We've seen a number of non-US banks exit the market, particularly European banks, really in response to ESG concerns. Now, the large tier US banks have still been very active, and while they are sensitive to ESG, it's not been quite the same story that we've seen with non-US banks, particularly the European banks. Just for some examples, and again, some of this predates COVID, but really did accelerate during COVID. Bank of Montreal completely exited the US banking market, or E&P market, with relatively short notice in 2020. And then we've had some other banks like ABN AMRO sell their portfolios to private investors, again, trying to monetize those loans and really get out of them in pretty short order. At the same time, too, we have seen some increased activity for some of the smaller regional banks, particularly those focused in Texas and the Southwest, who do have a long energy background, but they tended not to lead deals until relatively recently. So again, while most top tier deals may be led by, say, JP Morgan or Wells Fargo, again, we've seen a lot of activity from banks such as like Texas Capital Bank, BOKF. Again, there's been a lot of room for them to play in the market and not just participate in deals, but also lead them. Now, it's going to be interesting to see how some of this plays out over the next few months, because again, while we expected regional banks to take up more and more of the market share, there may be a little bit of a market disruption given what we saw last month with Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank and the increased scrutiny on a number of those smaller regional banks. Now, this is an interesting version from what we saw last year, where there's a lot of Fed scrutiny on the top tier banks, particularly during the summer, because a number of those banks had issues during their stress test. And so what we saw, particularly in Q3 of last year, a lot of those top tier banks pulled back in relatively short order, which really did slow down the lending market. And again, we thought the regional banks would have a great opportunity to take advantage of that. Now, again, that's flipped, where again, I think people feel a lot better about the top tier banks. But now there's a little more scrutiny on those regional banks, and we'll see to what extent Fed regulation comes in and potentially slows down their lending activity. On the direct alternative capital lender side, again, there's been a lot of interest there. Now, the deal volume has slowed down quite a bit within the last 12 months because of, first, a fair amount of bid-ask spread. I mean, again, the direct lenders have been looking for higher yields, and some of the companies have really wanted to go give to potential investors. But again, deals have started to pick up quite a bit. We also did see a number of different investment professional teams jump shops in the last year, and as well, they were going through their gardening leave and working through their non-competes. Again, just for practical reasons, deal activity did slow down there. But now a lot of them have now set up with new shops. And also, too, they've optimized their sources of capital, where previously they may have been dealing with sources of capital who, again, were very sensitive to ESG concerns and were trying to pull out of exposure to traditional oil and gas. Now they found new pools of capital who are better aligned with them and what they're trying to do, and who are better able to operate in this new environment. Again, we're expecting that those deals will pick up quite a bit, and we've already seen quite a bit of that to start off in 2023. And actually, too, I think given what just happened with the disruption with Silicon Valley Bank and some of these other small regional banks, that creates more of a hole for those alternative capital providers to step into, because the need for capital is still out there. It's really just trying to find the source of that capital. On the banking side, again, we're entering into the borrowing base season right now. Borrowing bases did grow quite a bit over 2022. And there's some sense that some banks may be tapped out. And so it wouldn't surprise me, again, if like borrowing bases largely stayed flat. And there may be some difficulty in trying to increase exposures and trying to increase borrowing bases, just because, again, the number of players has consolidated quite a bit. Paradoxically, the fact that we've had a stronger price environment may make it harder for some banks to actually increase because they have to look at their total exposure to borrowers. And for a number of these banks, they are also the hedge providers as well. And so as prices go up, they also have increased exposure in the form of the hedge obligations as well. And so again, that's going to require some borrowers to go in and find additional banks to step in and try to either get new banks to come in and join the credit facilities or find alternative sources of capital junior in the capital structure. That being said, again, it has been a pretty positive trend in general, though, in terms of terms we've seen. We've seen some amount of repricing transactions. So even though headline rates have gone up quite a bit and floating rates have gone up quite a bit, the margins on those rates have come down, where, again, we used to see really the market for a lot of RBLs as, say, SOFR plus, say, 3 to 4%. That's dropped anywhere 25 to 50 basis points across the board for a number of deals. And so this has been a really good time for stronger credit companies to go out into the market and try to reprice and also extend maturities. And also, too, we've seen additional flexibility from banks when it comes to any sort of covenant, is particularly with respect to investment capacity, distribution capacity, and trying to essentially claw back some of the tightening in the markets that we saw during the last restructuring cycle and during COVID, and trying to give banks additional opportunities to return capital to their investors. We've also seen quite a fair amount. At the same time, too, we have seen some stronger provisions regarding minimum hedging requirements as well. And this is throughout the entire market, not just on the bank side, but also in the alternative capital space and also in the securitization space as well. Again, people want, or banks and investors really want their borrowers to take advantage of the fact that they can lock in prices right now. And again, that tends to form the underwriting thesis behind a number of the borrowing bases we see at the moment. And then also, too, it's really the only way that any of the securitization deals get done. The basis behind those deals is the fact that you're able to hedge pretty well all the expected volumes that are expected to be produced. And the investors in those securitizations can take advantage of those hedges, locking in those prices for, say, 5, 6, 7 years, depending on how far up we're going. Yes?
Most of the sort of risk management and covenants that you're describing are very much applicable to the upstream sector and projects related specifically for oil and gas. So, is there any sort of discussion related to downstream projects, refinery projects, in terms of the margin for certain products that are exported, given the fact that there are certain price controls for products that you don't have when it's purchased to go or sale to go and
So we haven't seen as much covenant relaxing there, but we have seen more investor interest there. In fact, we just closed one deal right now where it was basically a quasi-project finance deal, because again, we're trying to take advantage of the fact that we can export more right now. But again, there really hasn't been much covenant relaxing, but there's definitely been more capital chasing those deals. And so we definitely have seen prices go down in terms of cheaper interest rates and also cheaper fees. Now, that being said, in the typical bank space, and this is actually a good transition to what we've been seeing as well, even though pricing has been coming down quite a bit, because of the difficulties in syndicating some deals, we have seen higher arrangement fees and upfront fees in order to get banks to join facilities. I expect that to continue, and I expect that also to affect other parts of the market as well. Even other sources of capital that have been traditionally more expensive, that will only become more expensive as time goes on, particularly in the direct lending space. The other thing, too, again, that we've seen, and I'm curious to see how much longer this continues, is really, again, even though banks have tried to optimize who they're lending to, and also in the direct lending space, we've seen greater optimization in terms of like who's investing these deals and trying to move away from sources of capital that are more ESG sensitive. There's still some pressure on traditional upstream companies to try to do something to be more ESG friendly. And the main thing that we've seen so far has really been in the forms of price adjustments for hitting certain key performance indexes, like such as KPIs. The main ones that we've seen really in the E&P space have been any sort of like methane monitoring. Also, too, the S&G part has been a very important part of ESG for these companies as well, where even if you're not necessarily going to be able, you're still an upstream company. And so there's a limit on what you can do on the E side of ESG. But on S&G, again, we've seen a number of companies putting in metrics, trying to hit those benchmarks as well in terms of improving corporate governance, their social awareness, anything that they can do to make themselves more ESG friendly and try to attract additional capital to come in, or in the case of some of their existing banks and existing investors, trying to give some sort of ESG gloss so that they can say, well, no, we are ESG friendly, and you investors should still stay with us and still provide us with hopefully cheap capital. Again, I think that's sort of the brief overview I want to provide, and hopefully not keep people from their lunches too much longer. So to the extent there are any questions, feel free to find me afterwards. Glad to answer any questions you may have.
Now, if I can just ask, given James what you just described, so in Brazil and the story in the U.S. has been very much private equity and alternative capital to develop the upstream resources here in recent years. It seems, Fernando, you were talking a lot about public companies and the IOCs. Are any of these factors James just described, how applicable and relevant is that to Brazil going forward, these kinds of capital providers, or is more of the focus going to be on the IOCs and public company?
Well, I have seen these companies, these new companies and the traditional companies that are now actually having a place in Brazil. I have seen them look into all kinds of sources of financing. Brazil, one of the many improvements in terms of regulation that Brazil has adopted, 5 years ago, was in terms of allowing a better scenario for RBL. So with the divestment of Petrobras, we have seen the first real RBL financing in Brazil and projects, RBL-based projects in Brazil, starting with Trident, offshore, some shallow water cluster, and then we have seen that being replicated through all of these onshore projects that Petrobras sold. But always, this is always something that companies are looking through, depending on their size, on their the origin. The company, the origin company, for example, is the first one that really was created by the consolidation of three very small companies that acquired small assets from Petrobras. And the initial financing of these companies was completely based on private equity of small groups in Brazil. And then when the companies were bought and consolidated into what we call now origin, it was backed by an RBL. So there is this kind of 2 or 3 stage financing with the initial financing on worst basis, and then as soon as the companies are consolidated and prove their thesis in terms of cash flow, of enhanced recovery, they are able to reach other sources of financing in the market.
I think just to add, you get the old Brazil, there was only bits and pieces left. Petrobras dominated. Then the super majors got their share, but they don't rely on any sort of financing for Brazil. They have their own sources. Now, for upstream, everything is made on third-party money. So equity is not really a Brazilian group with a family that puts a lot of money. Listed companies, private equity backed, or sometimes a combination of both. Many of them have resorted to acquisition financing, and that's more than 70% overseas banking. Dollar-denominated financing for upstream is easier. And you have asset-backed financing for gas, for instance. So all of the LNG terminals are heavily leveraged. And we expect many of the new technologies to also be leveraged, in particular for those who get the off-takes for German-based or German-backed off-taker in hydrogen stuff. So I think the message that we can give you is that there's so much room for different types of capital providers on what exists today and even more on what's coming, because other than the exploratory risk, the third part that Fernando said, that traditionally we don't get that kind of finance in Brazil, all the rest will be done on third-party money. None of those companies have their own cash flow resources to do what they're doing.
Very good. Thanks, everyone.
So, good afternoon. I would say that we would have now 1 hour discussion of taxes in Brazil before lunch, but I will be very brief. Actually, it's just one single slide. This is a very general overview of the tax system in Brazil. We have, I will not go through this, but just to have an idea, we have federal, state, and city taxes. In general, the corporate taxation, both on revenues and profits, is made at federal level. And then we have a set of indirect taxes at state and city levels. I chose to highlight here 4 main points that have been, according to our experience in the energy sector and in the most relevant recent discussions that we have been having in Brazil, some of the most relevant points for projects in infrastructure and in energy sectors. And these 4 points would be 2 related to direct taxes and 2 related to indirect taxes. I believe that one peculiarity of the Brazilian tax system is that indirect taxes play a very relevant role in the structuring of businesses in Brazil for several reasons. As you may see here, we have 5 indirect taxes, 5 different indirect taxes. One of these taxes is the state VAT, that is the ICMS, and it is a very relevant tax. The general rate is 18%, but it may range up to 25%, and it is applied on a gross-up basis, so the effective rate is even higher than that. And it is a state tax, and we have 27 states with different regulations in Brazil. And it is charged by the state of production, not by the state of consumption. So this is a set of circumstances that brings complexity and relevance of the ICMS for the structuring of businesses in Brazil. We had recently had an experience, as Danielle and Eric mentioned, with the opening of the natural gas market. And the plan launched by the former government to open the natural gas market had 4 pillars. One of these 4 pillars was the tax pillar, and mainly because of the relevance of this state tax. Our firm had participated in a bid to assist and won the bid to assist the federal government, the former federal government, on the drafting of a tax framework for the opening that would allow the opening of the gas market. And we have been working on this for almost a year, back in 2018. And certainly the most relevant tax was the state VAT. And after that, according to our experience, also the state VAT has been very relevant for the structuring of businesses in this field. So the 2 points that I would highlight regarding the state VAT are one related to CAPEX and one related to the operational phase. Actually, the point related to CAPEX is regards all the set of indirect taxes that we have. All these indirect taxes combined, they may reach a high burden that may reach 40%. And these taxes are, as a rule, applied also on investment phase, on the acquisition of equipment, on the investment phase. So of course, this is very important, especially for fields that are intensive in investment. The point of attention is that by means of combining a set of special customs regimes, special taxation regimes, ex-tariff tax benefits, negotiation of benefits with the states, and logistic tax planning, it is possible to, and that's what companies have been doing, significantly reduce this tax burden. So this is a very important, has been a very important point of attention. It has been crucial to viabilize business in Brazil in the last years. And there is a tax reform under discussion, a change to the federal constitution. This federal tax reform intends to eliminate the tax benefits. So something very important for who is, but in the elimination of the tax benefits, even an amendment to the Constitution may not affect the acquired rights. So all the companies that are currently discussing tax benefits in Brazil have a very important point of attention, that is to draft the benefit in a way that it characterizes an acquired right, basically with a fixed term, and characterizing an agreement, characterizing that the company has compromised itself to have investments in order to have the tax benefits. And as long as these conditions are met, not even a change to the Constitution may affect these tax benefits. So this is, in a nutshell, what we have been discussing regarding investments. The other point that still concerns the ICMS, and it is related to the operational phase, is, again, the negotiation of benefits. I don't know any successful investment project in Brazil out of São Paulo that does not have a state tax benefit. It is impossible. It's a big country. All the market, all the suppliers are concentrated in São Paulo. So if you are going to invest in another state, it is necessary to analyze if the state already has a benefit, and if it doesn't, it is possible under the law to negotiate with the state to obtain a benefit. So this is very relevant. Another point of attention is to choose to understand the chain, the logistic of the chain, and to correctly choose the state in which you will be established. I will give an example. Again, on the gas market, this is something that we have been doing a lot in the last years. That is to help companies to choose the state in which they will establish their trading gas companies, the commercialization companies, and also where they will establish the center of small-scale projects. And this should be done simulating several possible states together with the states in which will be the suppliers of gas and the consumer of gas. I will illustrate why this is important with an example. As we have several states with several tax rates and several legislations, you may be in a position, for instance, to be in a state in which you buy gas taxed at 18% and sell gas taxed at 7%. Depending on your margin, you eliminate, you ruin your margin due to this trapped credit that becomes an additional cost. Another example is some states give to power plants deferral exemption on the acquisition of gas. If you are a supplier in the same state of the power plant, you have a huge competitive advantage in comparison with the supplier that is in another state. So, I know cases in which companies are established in Rio or in São Paulo because it's the most easy states to be, the most obvious states, and then this is a huge problem regarding the SMS. So these are the 2 points of attention that I would like to mention regarding indirect taxation. And then there is the tax reform. I don't think I'll go into many details of the tax reform, but the tax reform is under discussion. It has been appointed by the current government as a priority. The idea is to totally change the indirect taxation. The general idea is good, is to simplify. So the idea is to make it more uniform. The legislation of, instead of having 27 legislations, having only one legislation, and changing the taxation from the state of production to the state of consumption, which will also eliminate many of the problems that we have today. It is a very polemic proposal. We had many years in which the states and the cities were the main opposition to this proposal. Now the states and the municipalities agree on it, but we have a resistance of the sectors that don't want to lose the possibility of having tax benefits. So this is a discussion that is in place right now in Brazil. Then the two other points that I would mention that are related to direct taxes. And we have here online my partner, Bruna in São Paulo, that is specialized in treaties and on transactions. If you have any questions to discuss direct taxes more deeply, she can jump in. But two main points that have been recent discussions in Brazil, and I believe that one of them has to do with your question. You asked about the export tax, if it could be postponed. I totally agree with what Daniel said. I believe it is a provisional measure for the government to postpone it. It would have to count with the agreement of Congress, and that's something very hard. And then there is another legal problem. The export tax is, according to the Constitution, an extra fiscal tax. It may not be used for covering the fiscal debt. And this is one of the reasons why it is being questioned at the Supreme Court. So the government would have a problem to apply it on a permanent basis because of that. And also the government has announced the plans the fiscal plans, and it is not on the fiscal plan, the measures, both measures to contain expenses and to increase revenues. That's not in the plan. What may be an alternative for government to obtain more revenues is one of the points that I would mention, that is the imposition of withholding income tax on dividends. Currently, we don't have withholding income tax on dividends in Brazil. They are exempted. But both former government and current government announced that this is a plan. The former government has presented a bill of law that has been approved by the Chamber of Deputies and was then stuck in Senate. That Senate was the opposition to the former government. But this is something that may happen probably next semester, to be in place as of 2024. And this, of course, has been a point of concern for foreign investors. I believe, especially for American investors, that is a point of concern for the structuring of businesses, right? Because I'm aware that you had recently rules that restrict the credits deriving from countries that are not totally in compliance with the arm's length principle. And Brazil is deemed not to be in compliance with the arm's length principle because of the transfer pricing rules that we adopt, because of some restrictions on the deductibility of royalties. So, of course, if we have the taxation on dividends, this is a point of attention. What we have, and then Bruna can complement with comments about treaties, but we don't have a large set of treaties in Brazil. But what we have seen is the use of holdings in jurisdictions in which we have treaties, sometimes Spain, sometimes Holland, depending on the specific situation, in order to minimize the restrictions to credits and the taxation at source. So the imposition of the withholding income tax at source is the withholding income tax on dividends is one point, and the other point is the big changes that are under discussion on transfer pricing rules. Transfer pricing rules currently in Brazil are not in compliance with the OECD guidelines. We have rules that are practical and currently easy to apply based on fixed margins, but not in compliance with the OECD guidelines. And Brazil is willing to join the OECD. So there is also a bill of law under discussion, totally changing transfer pricing rules to be in compliance with OECD guidelines. And one of the main sector that is opposing, that is discussing these changes is the oil and gas sector, because exporters of crude oil in Brazil usually are structured in a way that they have a trading company abroad and they sell to this trading company abroad using ANP reference price as the price practiced. Many times this trading company abroad keeps the margin. And according to current transfer pricing rules, the IRS accepts this practice. And there is a question mark as to if, with the changes, this practice will continue to be accepted or not. I understand that according to the current wording of the Bill of Law, there is space for this practice, for this structure to be accepted, but this will depend on further ruling. So this is one of the main discussions that we have been having with the oil and gas sector currently in Brazil regarding transfer pricing rules. So I believe that these were, of course, it would be very boring, but we could talk for an hour about taxes in Brazil. But these were the main points that I would like to comment. I don't know if you have any questions on these points or in other aspects of taxes in Brazil. Feel free to ask.
So we are running short on time, and I'm not going to speak. I'll give you guys some time back. But Camilla, how likely is it that these tax reforms will pass, the dividend tax and the changes to the transfer pricing?
I believe that the dividend tax is both. There are three reforms in the discussion. This more broad reform that is a constitutional reform on indirect taxes. This one, I believe, that is it's difficult to say, but I believe it's not likely to pass because it's a big change for the market. The transfer pricing and the taxation on dividends, I believe, are more likely to pass than the other one. Transfer pricing, in the beginning of the year, there was a big doubt because it was a proposal of the former government. And we didn't know if current left-wing would support it or not, but it is supporting it. So now the discussion is being if it will be enforced as of 2024 or as of 2025. There is a reasonable likelihood that this may pass, and the taxation on dividends as well. It has not been formally proposed by this government, but it is something that is a pledge of left wing for many years now. It was a surprise that it was proposed by a right-wing government, so there is a reasonable likelihood that can pass too.
It's always bad news when tax reform is supported by both parties. So, okay, well, Camilla said it all. I know we're short on time, so thank you very much. This is very informative. If you have any questions about Brazilian tax, call Camilla, or if you call me, I will direct you to Camilla.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, well, first of all, I'd like to thank Daniel, Fernando, Camila for the invite to participate in this webinar. It's a real pleasure to work together with you in providing such updated and important information about the Brazilian market. I'm Carlos Padilha, I'm investment coordinator at Apex. Apex is the Brazilian Trade and Investment Promotion Agency. We are linked to the Ministry of Development of Industry, Commerce and Services, which is headed by the Vice President of Brazil, Mr. Geraldo Alckmin, who is also the President of Board of Apex Brazil Board, okay? Apex exists for more than 25 years, and we support Brazilian companies that want to to export more goods and services, and help the companies that want to expand their business abroad, and also attract investments to Brazil. And we do that through our headquarters in Brasilia, capital of Brazil, and we do that with all of our regional offices within the Brazilian regions and also throughout the world. In Brazil, we have offices in São Paulo, in the south of Brazil, Porto Alegre, in Recife, the northeast parts of Brazil, and in the north region at Belém. And also we have international offices in Bogota, Colombia, in Miami and San Francisco in the United States, in Brussels in Europe, in Moscow, in Russia, in Dubai, in Israel, and also in China. So this is a pretty good coverage. We also have agents in India and South Africa, and we have a very good connection with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and all the Brazilian embassies throughout the world. So this is a great capillarity that we have regionally, and also we work inside Brazil, supporting more than 50 different sectors, including all the energy related sectors, oil and gas, solar, wind, power, hydrogen. So we can connect you to the right people, either at the public level or at the private level. Here's a few information that you might already know, so I'll pass through that real quick. Brazil is the first economy in Latin America with a GDP of $1.6 trillion, seventh largest FDI destination in 2021, and we are very stable at being one of the top destinations of foreign direct investments. We have a pretty good balance on our energy system. On the electric side, about 85% of the sources are renewable, and on the energy side, we have almost 50%. So this is very well balanced, and compared to the world, even to developed countries, that's a very good start. This new government has put also more focus on the energy transition opportunities, and Brazil is more now than ever compromised with this issue. Brazil also has the sixth population in the world with 214 million people. We're a continental size country like the US, about the same size. We're on the top 5 territories of the world. And we have a pretty good coverage of forest, about 58%. Also, we have 12% of the world reserves in water. That's the largest in the world. Fourth producer in renewables, second producer in biodiesel, 12th GDP in the world, and 8th major oil producer right now, looking to get into the top 5 within the next 10 years. So Brazil offers many different reasons for you to soft land in Brazil. One of them is the market access. Brazil is the largest market in Latin America, as I mentioned before. We have a pretty good and growing domestic market, and we can also be a great platform for all Latin America. We have plenty of natural resources, specifically on the energy sector. We are very competitive in almost all kinds of energy. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Also, in the mining sector, I should mention, we have pretty good access to valuable minerals. And we provide access to strategic assets and partners that can help you develop and adapt your technologies to Brazil. Also, Brazil, when you compare costs related to labor, we are very competitive, and we can provide some efficiency there. And hopefully, we can continue moving forward on the business environment issues. This has been a very important issue in past government, and many reforms have been put in place to make Brazil a more friendly place to do business and to establish your business. And we hope that the new government, with the new reforms that it is putting into Congress, we can pass these bills and make it even better. Probably Brazil, from a position of 124th place in the ranking, in this index ranking of the World Bank, we can get to the top 50 in a few coming years. I would like to talk a little bit about the new trends in the government in Brazil. So the presidency, the third presidency of Mr. Lula da Silva has now brought these main economic drives. So I will mention that Brazil is very open for international partnerships. And actually this, in the first 3 months of the new government, has been a top issue, and it has been very successful connecting to major power countries like the US and China and also Europe, but also it has a specific interest in getting connected to the BRICS countries and also Latin America countries and African nations. So this is a new policy that Brazil is eager to reinsert and be back into the international agenda. And this comes with a few other drives. One is reindustrialization of our country. So Brazil has been struggling with the industry sector because of the cost of Brazil issue. This has been talked here a little bit by our previous speakers, but it's a very important issue now in Brazil. We'll launch in a few months the new projects that may reinforce this drive. Also, energy transition for sure is one of the key drives. We are very well positioned to get started, and we want to continue moving forward and helping the world achieve the net zero goal by 2050. ESG is also a very important drive. We have many concerns about how we can support sustainability and support good governance and social concerns on the private and also the public sector. So this is a major agenda that should gain space in all the projects we support. And also Brazil is looking at regional development. And this means like the Northeast region and the North region where the Amazon is, are regions that should be one of the most important focus of the growth of Brazil as a whole, even considering that these regions have a chronic difficulty with developing businesses and jobs creation and everything. So we look at the potentialities that there are in these regions, and it's really easy to understand that we are very behind the potential that these two regions have, specifically these two regions. Here at Apex Brazil, I work with some strategic sector. So we support, besides energy, oil and gas, renewables, agribusiness, and also infrastructure, including logistics, and also social-based projects like sanitation and waste management. So it's a pretty big agenda, even if you consider one of these segments isolated. But we have dedicated executives for each one of these agendas, and we work together with many different players in the public and the private sector to cooperate and develop these opportunities. So I can mention an investment partnership program, which has been launched in 2017, and it's been a very successful program of privatization and concessions. We have a very good pipeline of investments due to the auctions that were developed by the PPI secretary. Also, we have connections with the Energy Research Office, EPE, in Portuguese, Empresa de Pesquisa Energética. They are the ones that are responsible for making the long-term plans for the energy sector. So we work very closely with them. Also, the Wind Association, ABE Eólica, the Brazilian Institute of Petroleum, the Solar Association, the the Power Association, the National Petroleum Agency, Petrobras, and also some associations in the agribusiness sector. So these cooperation agreements provide us with that very good capability within Brazil. Also, Apex is the agency that leads all the investment promotion initiatives. So this is in the screen, our participation in OTC show. Since 2018, we are organizing it directly, and we have a very large team of authorities, companies, and partners. And we'll be there again this year with a record of 54 Brazilian companies that want to partner and want to develop projects in Brazil. So I welcome you to visit the Brazilian Pavilion during OTC if you have any specific interest, and if you want to meet me or any of the partners that will be there, I can sure put you in contact and help you set up meetings. So I'll leave my contacts by the end of this presentation, so you can send me messages if you want to have a closer look at what Brazil has to offer there, okay? Also, we do shows elsewhere. This is at IPAC in Abu Dhabi in 2021 and 2022, and we'll also be in other shows for oil and gas, for wind, solar, and agribusiness, specifically fertilizer opportunities. Well, our team of executives are ready to provide you with market and sector intelligence, with the mapping of investment opportunity, with a portfolio of qualified projects and companies that want established partnerships. So we work with free of charge matchmaking support, key connections with authorities and regulators, and we can help you with customized agendas and site visits, and try to, together with our service provider like Machado Meyer, help you out in the entry mode decision-making process in locating your business. And also, once you're here, we can help you out with aftercare and expansion projects. So we do have very good information to share with you, and we can do it in a customized mode. And also, we, as I mentioned before, set up a portfolio of investment opportunity. This document in the center of the screen, we are updating this document. It will be launched during OTC, and you'll be able to scan a QR code and download more than around 150 investment projects considering energy, infrastructure, and renewables. And also, we can share with you the portfolio of companies that want to partner, so you can be introduced to. We'll be more than glad to do so. And also, we can provide you with overview of the sectors or segments that you work with. Talking about energy transition, I'll go very quickly here because it has been talked about before, but it's expected that the Brazilian power sector will have an increase of 27% from 186 gigawatts to 236 gigawatts. And also, we'll have an increase of share specifically in solar and wind, and a decrease in the hydro. So this is what is expected for the upcoming years. When I talk to the new government, I would risk a comment that we'll try to reach 100% renewable in the power generation mix up to 2030. Here's the energy balance mix. So we are very balanced, as I mentioned before. Almost 50% are renewable, and oil and gas plays on 33% of oil and 12% of natural gas. So these other sources like coal should be reduced, and increase in biomass, and also wind in biofuels mainly. Okay, I'll not read this document, but I'll share with you in my presentation so you can understand the top 7 policies that are being developed regarding energy transition by the Ministry of Mines and Energy. Regarding renewable, I invite you to download the 10-year energy expansion plan. Brazil works with these guidelines that are produced by the Energy Research Office. Also, we can see an increase in consumption and installed capacity that is growing the importance of solar and wind, specific solar in this chart here. And we will have some auctions this year to increase the capacity of power generation. So you can see either we have the regulated market and the free market. Both models are being very successful. The regulated market has long-term contracts and are always doing some new auctions. So you should look into that. And also the free market, where you can have a negotiation directly with the private sector. It's showing a very great increase, either in consumption and in the generation of distributed generation. And we'll have some opportunities here in 2023. We'll have two auctions, one in June for transmission lines and the other in October for, and we expect to create 36,000 new jobs with these two auctions. And there's a possibility that a third one will also happen in December. So talking about solar power, we are the largest market in Latin America. We have a very good condition to develop these kinds of projects, superior to Spain and France, for example. We have a free market for growth and new distributed generation framework. So as we cooperate with the Solar Association, we can provide you with customized information and share that with you. Also with the wind, we also are in top 10 in the world. Our average capacity factor is over 40%, which is pretty good. It's the global leader. And we have a high growth rate in the world, highest growth rate in the world, about 41% between 2010 and 2018. And this is the potential map of wind energy. So where you see the shaded red areas and more dark areas in the red tones, you see where the location of new wind farms are mostly successful. So the northeast part of Brazil, as I mentioned, is a priority in the government, and it's very, it has very good conditions for either wind and solar projects, and also oil and gas onshore and the equatorial margin offshore. The new legislation on offshore wind has been implemented. It's not ready yet, as it's been mentioned before. But we can see, even though on the onshore projects, a very high growth rate, specifically in the northeast, southeast, and south of Brazil. Here are a few statistics on the wind. And also, I would like to mention that we are paying a lot of attention to the new green hydrogen projects. There's been a lot of consults from countries in Europe and also in other parts of the world about what's going on and how are we planning to implement the new policies on hydrogen. So the guidelines are being all structured in this link, the National Program of Hydrogen, and Apex Brazil is part of it in their international cooperation part, XE6. But we are being very focused on developing this new opportunities. Even though it's not a new source of energy, we know there are companies in Brazil that produce hydrogen for more than 50 years, but now there's a very good, important focus specifically in blue and green hydrogen in Brazil. So I'll go very fast on oil and gas because much has been talked about, but opportunities are everywhere in the oil and gas industry in Brazil, in the pre-salt fields, in conventional offshore and onshore. Conventional offshore and onshore assets are being passed to the private sector, and companies, the oil junior companies that have been flourished, they are being very successful, and they are making a very important impact in the areas that they develop their projects. Also, we have great demands for investments in infrastructure for downstream and refineries. So if you are either a service provider or a technological company that wants to help Brazil with these challenges, you'll be very welcome. Natural gas is a major opportunity also. The market regulation is being restructured, and more investments are coming into place. And also, we have many opportunities in the supply chain, since the ANP regulation has an important focus on innovation and partnership developments. This is an overview on the Brazilian upstream. I'm not going through that right now, but make myself available if you have any specific doubts. We can see a qualitative change since the pre-salt discovery in 2010 happened, and pre-salt is being very important. It's a gold mine for the oil industry in Brazil. So Petrobras is focusing a lot there, and they are also working together with other international oil companies that want to partner for the risk and for the profit. So with the pre-salt discovery, we expect to put Brazil among the top 5 oil and gas oil producers in the world, reaching more than 5 million barrel oil equivalent per day by 2030. But this will demand a lot of investments from Petrobras and the other oil companies. So Brazil, for sure, is a growth area for oil and gas, and many opportunities there for international companies, and specifically those companies that want to partner with a Brazilian company. Also, I should mention that Apex has a work there towards the partnership. So you can see here, more than 80 companies have established in Brazil recently, and they are exploring the Brazilian market in many different segments. This is a framework about the successful bidding rounds in the last few years. So since 2017 to 2022, Brazil has acquired a lot of bonuses, signature bonus for the bidding rounds. And you can see here all the distribution, who are the companies that paid for the bonus and who are the key players. So I would like to share that with you. So as I mentioned, Apex has a partnership program called BPP, Brazilian Petroleum Partnerships. Today, we have more than 60 Brazilian companies that we support. So depending on the segment that you work, you can also engage in this program. And I'll be glad to make introductions to you. We have the support of former Petrobras employees to do all the qualifying process. And then they do matchmaking analysis and try to select at least 3 candidates where we can have these introductions. Very quickly about agribusiness, I'll just mention that Brazil is a major player, and we do need a lot of investments, specifically in the fertilizer industry. Here's the dependency of Brazilian fertilizer is almost 95%. So we import all these all the NPK fertilizers that we need for the growth of the crops. Talking about infrastructure, I'll just show one slide that summarizes all the PPI portfolio So we are working in airports, ports, highways, railways, regional development, national parks, mining, tourism, and also at the state level for more specific urban projects like sanitation and waste management. Okay, to wrap up, I'll mention that in 2022, Apex Brazil supported projects that sum up to $2.17 billion. We contact more than 247 companies and investors that would like some support from us. We were able to engage them in 27 investment projects in Brazil, and we participated in 71 initiatives that promoted Brazil as a very prime destiny for investments with more than 25 participants. So we have this projection that the projects we supported were able to create more than 5,000 jobs. And also here, you can see some awards that Apex has achieved in the last few years. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed your lunch, and I'm sorry to bother you with all this information. So if you need more information and you want my contacts, please let me know. I'll put it on the screen for once more so you can take a note, but it's basically my name, carlos.padilla with a double L, at apexbrazil.com.br. And if you want to add me on LinkedIn, please do so. I'll be more than glad to interact. Okay? Thank you so much.